to Discograffiti, the Music Obsessives podcast that gives freaks like you and me the chance to connect with a brotherhood obsessed with rating the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever mattered. I'm your host, Dave Gebroe, and in this episode, I interview 1001 Album Complaints host Rob Kassees as he walks us through the process of creating and releasing your very own album, something he's done many times over by this point. In fact, he's just released an initial sold-out vinyl press run of a new record that has to be heard to be believed. Stay Puft is the best Ghostbusters musical you'll hear this year. Upbeat songs and catchy hooks abound as his band The Chop retells the story of science's triumph over ancient Sumerian demigods. If you love indie concept albums made by old pros whose friendship and experience ooze through the speakers at every turn, you'll love Stay Puft. And to boot, it was printed with love to special Slimer green vinyl with all original songs and artwork. This record is a hell of a lot of fun. You can order your copy at linktree/thechopUnlimited. That's linktr.ee/thechopUnlimited. And so, without further ado, welcome then to Rob Kassees' step-by-step guide on how to make a record. All right, lads and ladies, we are here with the maestro, Rob Kassees, host of many hosts of one of my favorite podcasts, actually the only podcast I can stand to listen to, called 1001 Album Complaints, which I have had the honor to guest star on. Rob has many tentacles in many pies. I've mixed my metaphors there, but it shan't matter because, of course, you understand where I'm going with this. But Rob has a day job, plus he's got a stable family life. I believe it's stable, and
sure.
He's got a great.
Well, the night is young, Dave.
That's true. He's got an incredible podcast, and he's got a great band, and we're here to talk about the steps involved with putting together an album, which he has done. Rob, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me, Dave. Always excited to talk to you, and excited to get into some of the details, the logistics of making a record as an independent musician.
Well, I know, besides having your left brain, you got your right brain, and both of those sides are, I think, at all times in quite a state of excitability because you're a very creative guy, but I know that you've always got your Excel sheets within arm's reach, right?
Yeah, it's true. I've always been a bit of a quantitative kid. I was good at math. I had a career in research science for a while, so I have a little bit of that science background, and I ended up going to business school, gasp. And yet I love being a creative and making music. So I kind of balance those two sides of myself. And unlike a lot of the dudes in bands that I've run across anyway, I tend to be very grounded and business minded and punctual and things like that.
Tell me about your band. Tell me about the band. Tell me about the output so far. Give me the history of the entire thing.
Yeah, the band is called the Beverly Crushers, and it's a group of lifelong musicians who agreed to a writing prompt of Star Trek: The Next Generation, to write original songs that reference or are about or expand on characters or worlds within the 1990s television show Star Trek: The Next Generation. This is the one with Patrick Stewart playing Picard as the captain and Data, the android, things like that. And it's a show we all watched as kids when it was first on, and I do think it's a good show, kind of like these sci-fi short stories, a little bit of CSI in space, early 1 hour primetime drama. And you would think by having a band about Star Trek that we might be insane Trekkies. Turns out we're not. I do like Star Trek, but we're more nerds about the act of recording. And we just thought it was fun to take a silly idea, like a writing prompt that says write songs about Star Trek, and treat it with sort of dead seriousness that lifelong musicians and people who know a lot about recording and songwriting and production would give it. So that's sort of how we got here. We've now released 2 full-length albums as the Beverly Crushers. The most recent one came out this year in 2025. We're here to talk about how we created it. It's called Enterprise. It's available everywhere, of course, and we printed it to a vinyl record as well.
And the record, unsurprisingly, you sent me a copy, and in listening to it, the first thought I had was, and I wasn't surprised, given your pedigree and, everything that I've come across that you've generated, is how professional it sounds. It's good music, well recorded.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, like I said, that's sort of the fun of it for us. And, one of the things I think is a framing device here is for me, and I think a lot of my friends, we grew up playing music, being obsessed with music. It's the reason we have these podcasts that we have. And in our 20s, or in my 20s, I played in a bunch of bands. I did the touring thing a fair amount. I briefly thought I was going to make it until those dreams were dashed and I got a real job. And what I noticed is that as you get older, adult responsibilities, family, career, things like that kick in. I wanted to stay connected to creativity and music, but it's natural, I think, that your relationship to it changes. And so what it morphed into over time was a series of recording projects. It was more in depth on the writing, on the production, on home recording, on doing things with friends that might be a little farther distant and then getting together in a recording studio for a long weekend to bang through some tracks that you had talked about in email correspondence. So that's sort of how it shifted, and I'm really happy about that.
How long ago did you actually, and what was the moment like where you decided, okay, I'm not going to put all my eggs in this basket?
Right about age 28. I think I can almost pinpoint it to a particular show my band was playing. I was in a band called The Chop with all my best friends in San Francisco, and we had this high energy, relatively low musical ability approach to playing music. It was a little bit of a band experiment, but we had a lot of fun. Costumes, confetti, every show was different, that kind of thing. And at the night I knew that we were never going to make it, we played a gig with a band that we had played with before, but we were friends with, but we hadn't seen them in about 6 months. And they came up, they were from Santa Cruz, which is a little far away from San Francisco. They came up to play the show. They were going to go on first. We were chatting with them before the show. Cool, catching up. They go on. And they had just transformed their band into this professional sounding band. I can't describe it any other way. Literally from the first note they played, it was like an uh-oh moment. Like, how are we going to follow these guys? They're now professionals. We suck by comparison. To the point where even my girlfriend at the time pulled me aside during their set in a very unhelpful way. And it was like, you gotta do something. You can't just play the same old songs after this, right? This is not. Can you write something different? I'm like, what do you want me to do?
Is that the woman you wound up marrying, or no?
It is not, Dave. It is not. She was not being overly helpful. Anyway, it was a spiritual de-pantsing. That was the point. Now that band went on to record many great records and actually tour the world and have a decent amount of indie success. They're called Sleepy Sun. They're a great band. Check them out. But it really highlighted that we were not a professional band, and it made me realize that we were not going to become one.
But couldn't that have hit you in a different way and inspired you to to kick things up a notch? And it just didn't happen that way, huh?
It just didn't happen. And I think another factor, frankly, was my practicality that we previously spoke about. I already had a decent 9-to-5 job. I'm not saying I was overly committed to it, but I had a reasonable career. I wasn't a 22-year-old living in a flop house with my bandmates and practicing every day. I do think that is the recipe for success, is that kind of going all in mentality. And for whatever reason, that just didn't quite happen. And I think I saw things clearly at that moment.
And you know what? My gut tells me that was not a depressing notion for you, that you just kind of rolled with that.
Yeah, that's true. You're also getting to a point where you're 27, 28 and beyond, where you're like, the idea of making $30,000 a year and sleeping on floors or in a smelly van with dudes all the time and playing to nobody in Omaha, Nebraska just doesn't sound as appealing anymore. Right. The interest in that just wanes year over year.
All right, that concludes your free sneak peek into today's Patreon episode. If you want to hear the rest of it, just visit patreon.com/discograffiti and either purchase this podcast by itself for $4, or better yet, subscribe at the major tier and get access to Discograffiti's 4 weekly episodes. That's Friday's free episode, the Sunday Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound episode, which showcases Patreon members and the Elephant Six world, your Monday bonus episode, and your Wednesday early release ad-free super extended director's cut of that Friday's show. Please keep in mind this is entirely how I support my wife and 6-year-old son, so don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not supporting Discograffiti. Become a member so you don't miss a single thing at patreon.com/Discograffiti.